The galaxy had known an uneasy peace for centuries, but that peace was shattered the moment the Grush Orcs arrived. They came from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a race that thrived on chaos and destruction. Their ships were colossal, bristling with crude yet potent weaponry, and they attacked with a ferocity that left no room for mercy. Entire colonies were wiped out in a matter of days, and the Federation, once confident in its control, was thrown into disarray. The Orcs didn't just conquer, they obliterated. From the first strike, it was clear the Federation was unprepared. The Orcs were unlike anything the Federation had encountered. They fought without strategy or care for casualties, their brutal tactics overwhelming the advanced defenses of the Federation. The warships of the Federation crumbled like paper in the face of the Orcish onslaught, and their cities fell before the crushing blows of the Orcish warbands. No one knew how to stop them. Their numbers seemed endless, and their savagery was unmatched. The Federation was losing, and there was no sign of hope. But then, in the darkest hour of the Federation's struggle, a voice emerged, one they hadn't expected. Captain Hunter Clark had fought in more battles than most could count. Born on Earth, he had lived through the brutal wars of his own people before joining the Federation's military ranks. He was known for his daring, his ruthlessness in combat, and his uncanny ability to outthink his enemies. Clark was a soldier of the old ways, a survivor who understood the value of primal instinct in warfare. And he believed that humanity, with its resilience and cunning, could become the key to winning this war. Gathering a group of the Federation's best soldiers, Clark began to formulate a plan. The Orcs were strong, yes, but they lacked something crucial: the ability to think beyond the immediate. They fought with mindless aggression, using brute force to win battles. Clark had a different idea. He would train his team to think like the Orcs, but to fight smarter. Where the Orcs relied on sheer power, humanity could strike with calculated precision. He would teach his soldiers to embrace the ferocity of Orcish combat, but channel it into something more effective, something they could control. The Federation was skeptical. Many dismissed Clark as reckless, even arrogant. But as the Orcs continued their rampage across the galaxy, it became clear that humanity's brutal methods might just be their only hope. Clark's team, armed with nothing but their wits and the raw power of human instinct, prepared for a mission that would take them deep into Orc territory. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the Grush system, gather intelligence, and strike fear into the heart of the Orcs. It was a suicide mission. No human had ever returned from Grush alive. But Clark believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology. It was its unrelenting will to survive. And this time, survival meant fighting fire with fire. Captain Hunter Clark's team was an unlikely collection of soldiers, each handpicked for their skill, but more importantly, for their ability to adapt and think outside the box. Among them was Sergeant Emily Walker, a weapons specialist from Earth, whose sharp instincts in close combat made her a force to be reckoned with. Lieutenant James "Jax" Riley, a former criminal who'd found redemption in the military, was a master of stealth and infiltration. And then there was Dr. Lena Pierce, a biologist and tactical genius who had studied Orcish behavior patterns for months. Together, they were humanity's last, best hope against the onslaught of the Grush Orcs. The mission was set into motion under the cover of darkness. Clark's team boarded a stealth ship designed to slip past Orc detection, using technology that had never been tested in such hostile territory. The ship's hull was coated with a special composite material that absorbed radiation, making it nearly invisible to Orc sensors. Still, the journey to Grush would be anything but easy. The Orcs were everywhere, patrolling the outer reaches of their home system with warships the size of cities. As the team approached the Grush system, the weight of the task ahead settled in. Clark's mind was sharp, his eyes never leaving the flickering holoscreen in front of him. He knew the odds. The Grush system was heavily fortified, and the Orcs had no mercy for trespassers. But Clark wasn't thinking about the odds. He was thinking about the one thing the Federation had overlooked: Humans had the capacity to adapt. The Orcs, on the other hand, did not. Dr. Pierce had spent countless hours studying Orc psychology. The Orcs had a simple philosophy: win by crushing everything in their path. They thrived in chaos, taking what they wanted by force. But there was one thing that the Orcs didn't understand about humanity. Humans weren't just survivors, they were thinkers. They could take on the Orcs' savagery and turn it into something calculated, something lethal. The plan was simple: infiltrate an Orc command post deep within the system, gather intelligence, and then strike. The Orcs had become predictable, and Clark's team would use their own brutality against them. They would not only kill, they would make the Orcs fear them. Clark had promised his team that they would show the Grush Orcs something they'd never seen before, a species that could fight with them on their own terms. As they neared their target, Clark's heart pounded in his chest. It was time to execute. The stealth ship slipped through the last layers of the Orc defense grid, landing undetected on the barren moon that orbited Grush's second planet. For the first time since they had set foot on the ship, Clark allowed himself a moment of pause. This was it, the moment where humanity's fate would be decided. No one spoke as they disembarked. They didn't need to. They knew the stakes. They knew what they had to do. The Orcs had no idea that the real storm had just arrived. And this time, it wasn't them who would be doing the destroying. The barren moon beneath their feet was a quiet, desolate place, but Clark knew better than to take its stillness as a sign of safety. The Grush Orcs were masters of ambush, and even their remote outposts were swarming with sentries and scouts. As Clark and his team stepped onto the moon's rough surface, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. They were alone in enemy territory, and failure meant death, not just for them, but for the entire Federation. "Stay sharp," Clark muttered, his voice low and steady. "Move in pairs. We infiltrate, gather intel, and get out fast. The longer we stay, the more dangerous it gets." Walker, her eyes scanning the surrounding cliffs, nodded in acknowledgement. She gripped her pulse rifle tightly, ready for anything. Beside her, Jax Riley moved with his usual calm, the practiced ease of someone who had spent most of his life in the shadows. His specialty was getting in and out unnoticed, and if anyone could navigate an Orc base unseen, it was him. "Got a feeling they're expecting us," Jax said, his voice barely a whisper as he checked his equipment. "I don't think this mission's gonna stay quiet for long." Clark nodded grimly. "That's the point. We're not here to stay quiet. We're here to make sure the Orcs know that humans are coming for them." They moved quickly, staying low to avoid detection as they climbed the jagged rock formations that led toward the Orc command post. Dr. Pierce had identified the site from satellite scans, a massive complex built into the side of the moon's mountains, a fortified base that housed the Grush warlords. It was here, Clark knew, that the Orcs coordinated their latest offensive. Taking it down would disrupt their entire war machine. As they neared the entrance to the base, Riley signaled that they were close. Clark's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the area. Orcish warbands patrolled the exterior, their crude, hulking forms moving in unison. They were large, muscular, and terrifying, but Clark had seen the same kind of creatures before. Brute force, yes, but little in the way of discipline. Their strength was their weakness, and that was exactly what he needed. "I've got a plan," Clark whispered to his team, his voice steady but with an edge of excitement. "We'll hit them hard, disrupt their perimeter, then slip inside while they're still reeling. Let them think they've got us pinned down, and when they come charging in, we hit them from all sides." Walker's lips curled into a grim smile. "I like the sound of that. We're going to make them regret ever coming into human space," Clark added, his eyes burning with determination. "Get ready." Jax disappeared into the shadows first, his dark form blending with the rocky landscape as he moved toward the sentries. The rest of the team followed, staying in the cover of night, silently making their way toward the heart of the Orc stronghold. The quiet moments before battle were always the hardest, the tension hanging thick in the air. But Clark knew one thing for certain. This was humanity's chance to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The Orcs were about to learn that humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. And they were going to win this one. The moon's cold surface seemed to pulse with a quiet tension as Clark's team crept through the shadows, closing in on the heart of the Orc base. Every step, every breath felt amplified in the silent night, the weight of the mission settling deeper with each passing second. They were entering a war zone, but unlike the Orcs, they had a plan. And they weren't about to waste it. Clark's mind raced as he observed the movements of the Orc patrols. He could almost predict where they would go next, where they'd shift positions. His team had studied Orc behavior for months, and now their training was about to pay off. The Orcs were powerful, but they lacked the subtlety to anticipate a strike like this. They relied on sheer force and numbers, trusting their strength to overwhelm any enemy. But that would be their downfall. Positions, Clark whispered into his comms. Let's move. Jax, already in position, flicked his wrists to signal the start of the operation. He was the first to act, launching a small, explosive charge onto the perimeter wall that sent a burst of smoke and debris into the air. The Orcs scrambled, their deep, guttural shouts echoing as confusion spread through their ranks. They were slow to react, their brute force clumsy in the face of something they didn't understand. Now, Clark barked. The team sprang into action. Walker and Riley split off, darting into the chaos with practiced speed. Clark himself surged forward, taking advantage of the Orcish disarray. They had planned for this moment. The Orcs would underestimate them, believing the explosion was just another simple assault, a diversion. But the real strike was about to come from within. As the Orc soldiers rushed toward the breach in the perimeter, they were met with the unexpected. Human soldiers fighting with the same savage intensity they had seen from the Orcs. Clark and his team used their knowledge of Orcish combat against them, launching attacks that felt like primal violence, each blow designed to break their enemies' will rather than just kill them. Keep pushing, Clark shouted as he swung a heavy, modified bladed weapon into the chest of an advancing Orc. The creature let out a growl of frustration, stumbling back before falling to the ground. Clark had seen the look in its eyes. A moment of shock, then fear. It wasn't just the humans' firepower that was terrifying. It was the unpredictability of their combat style, the ferocity with which they fought, as if every soldier had tapped into a primal force deep inside them. And it was working. The Orcs, in their panic, began to falter. They were used to charging at their enemies, overwhelming them with sheer size and strength. But humanity wasn't like that. They didn't rely on numbers. They fought smarter, faster, and with an intensity the Orcs couldn't match. The battle had shifted, and the humans were taking control. Walker's pulse rifle sang through the air, cutting down 2 Orcs that had flanked their position. Riley, with his stealth skills, took out a third from behind, moving like a shadow in the night. The team was working in perfect unison, striking from unexpected angles and sowing confusion among the Orc ranks. Keep them off balance, Clark instructed, moving deeper into the base. We'll get what we came for. As they closed in on their target, an Orc command center built into the heart of the base. Clark could feel the tide turning. The Orcs had no idea what was coming for them, and they were about to learn that the humans were not just survivors. They were predators. The explosion rocked the command center, and for a split second, the entire facility seemed to shake. Clark's team was thrown off balance, but they quickly regained their footing. Grok, the massive Orc warlord, let out an earth-shattering roar as he swung his hammer wildly, scattering Orcs left and right. His massive bulk was an unstoppable force, but the humans were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. Move, now, Clark yelled, his voice commanding. Walker was the first to react, sprinting toward the exit, her pulse rifle aimed at any Orc that dared cross her path. Behind her, Jax worked his way through the confusion, using his skills to disable security doors and redirect Orc patrols, buying them precious moments. Dr. Pierce, despite the chaos, moved with precision, securing critical data from one of the terminals, ensuring they had everything they needed to expose the Orcs' war strategies to the Federation. But Clark didn't just focus on escaping. His eyes were fixed on Grok, who was slowly advancing toward them, his warhammer smashing into the walls as he lumbered forward. The Orc warlord's eyes were filled with pure rage, but Clark saw an opening. He saw the brute force that had worked for Grok in every battle was now turning against him. Grok was used to crushing his enemies without thinking, but he hadn't accounted for the human's ability to adapt. Clark moved to the front, meeting Grok's charge with a calculated response. As the warlord swung his hammer again, Clark ducked under the blow, his instincts honed from years of battle. He then rolled toward Grok's left side, narrowly dodging the next devastating swing of the hammer. Grok roared in frustration, swinging wildly, but Clark was already on the move again. "Now, Jax," Clark shouted. Jax Riley didn't need to be told twice. He was already behind Grok, using his agility to slip past the warlord unnoticed. In one fluid motion, Jax activated a charge he had planted earlier near the warlord's feet. The resulting explosion wasn't enough to kill Grok, but it was enough to momentarily stun him. The Orc staggered, disoriented, and Clark wasted no time. He rushed forward, delivering a powerful punch to Grok's side that caused the warlord to stumble. "Keep pushing him back," Clark ordered, his voice cold. Walker was already closing in, taking out any Orcs that attempted to intervene. Pierce was right behind her, focusing on keeping their exit secure. Clark could feel the tension mounting as Grok, though stunned, began to recover. He swung his hammer again, aiming at Clark's position. Clark leaped to the side, narrowly missing the crushing blow, and rolled back to his feet. "Fall back! Fall back!" Clark ordered, signaling his team to move toward the exit. The plan was never to fight Grok directly. It was to weaken his forces, disrupt his operations, and get out alive. The data Pierce had extracted would do more damage to the Orcs than any battle could. They had already won, in a way. With Grok still roaring in fury, Clark's team rushed toward the extraction point. They had caused enough havoc. The Orc base was in disarray, their command systems compromised, and their forces were already beginning to falter. Clark could feel the shift in the air, the realization that the Grushk warlords were no longer in control. "Extraction in 3 minutes," Jax shouted, eyes scanning for incoming threats. "Keep moving," Clark barked. They couldn't afford to slow down. They reached the escape route, a hidden passage they had mapped earlier. Clark's heart raced as the countdown to their extraction ticked away. He knew they were on the verge of something big. The Federation would know what had happened here. The Grushk would understand that humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the extraction shuttle arrived, the team piled aboard, bloodied but victorious. Clark took one last look at the shattered remains of the Orc base, the sounds of destruction still echoing in the distance. The Orcs had underestimated humanity's capacity for brutality and resilience. This wasn't just a victory, it was a message. The war wasn't over, but humanity had just taken the first step toward winning it. The Orcs might have thought they were the most savage race in the galaxy, but Clark and his team had shown them something far more dangerous. The Grushk Orcs had learned that humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win, and they would stop at nothing to do it. As the extraction shuttle shot away from the moon's surface, Clark allowed himself a moment to breathe. The quiet hum of the engines was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. They had achieved what no one thought possible, taking down the heart of the Orc war machine, striking at their command center, and leaving them scrambling in the dark. But Clark knew this was just the beginning. The Orcs were a relentless force, and they would retaliate. They always did. "Status report," Clark ordered, his voice steady but intense. He turned his gaze toward each member of his team, one by one. Walker wiped the blood from her brow and checked her pulse rifle. "We're good. Couple of close calls, but nothing we couldn't handle." Riley leaned back in his seat, cracking his knuckles with a smirk. "I'm more interested in what comes next. We shook them up good, but we need to follow through." Dr. Pierce, still catching her breath, adjusted her glasses and said, "We've got the intel. We've mapped their communications network and identified key supply routes. The Orcs are going to be in disarray for a while, but their leadership won't crumble overnight. We need to keep the pressure on them." Clark nodded. "Exactly. We've got to hit them where it hurts. We can't let up." "Agreed," Walker said, leaning forward. "But I'm still thinking about Grok. That beast isn't going to forget this. He'll want revenge." Clark's eyes hardened. "Let him come. The Orcs think they can scare us into submission. We'll show them that they're the ones who should be afraid." The rest of the team fell silent, each lost in their thoughts as they rocketed away from the Orc base. Clark's mind was already running through the next steps. The Federation would want updates, strategy reports, and further analysis of the Orc forces. But more than that, they would need results. Clark had delivered a blow, but they had to make sure it wasn't just a one-time thing. They needed to exploit the opening they'd created. "Clark, you're not gonna believe this," Jax said suddenly, breaking the silence. "There's something strange in the data we extracted." Clark's attention snapped to Jax. "What do you mean?" Jax's eyes were glued to his console, fingers flying over the keys as he pulled up encrypted files. "I was going through the Orc communications, and there's something here about an alliance. The Orcs aren't working alone. They've got a new partner." Pierce leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "A new partner? Who?" Jax didn't answer immediately. He scrolled through more data, pulling up a series of intercepted transmissions. When the name appeared on the screen, Clark's blood ran cold. "The Xalagor," Jax muttered. "An entire armada of them. The Orcs have allied with the Xalagor." Clark cursed under his breath. The Xalagor were a terrifying force, once thought to be a myth. A race of cold, calculating beings with technology light years ahead of anything humanity had. The Xalagor were known for their ruthless precision and their complete lack of mercy. If they were working with the Orcs, the stakes just got a whole lot higher. "We need to warn the Federation," Clark said, his mind racing. "The Xalagor won't just be a new challenge. They'll be a whole new level of warfare. We have to hit them harder now, while we've still got the upper hand." Dr. Pierce shook her head. "It's worse than that. The Xalagor don't just fight. They conquer. They take entire systems, strip them of their resources, and leave nothing behind but death. If they've teamed up with the Orcs, they're planning something big." Clark clenched his fists. "Then it's time to make sure they regret it. We got one shot at this, and I'm not going to let it slip away." Jax tapped a few more keys, bringing up a series of coordinates. "I've traced their movements. They're not just in the Grush system. They've already moved toward the outer rim. If we don't act fast, they'll reach Federation space before we even know what hit us." Walker looked at Clark, her expression hardening. "We've already shown the Orcs what humanity can do. Now it's time to show them what happens when you mess with us." Clark stood, his mind made up. "We're hitting them before they get any closer to Federation territory. We don't just disrupt their operations anymore. We end them. All of them. We'll cripple this alliance before it even gets off the ground." As the shuttle sped toward the next battleground, Clark could already feel the weight of the challenge ahead. The battle had changed. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for the future of humanity. And this time, they would fight with the full fury of the human spirit. The Grush Orcs and the Xalagor would learn one irrefutable truth. They had made the mistake of underestimating humanity, and that mistake would cost them everything. The mood aboard the shuttle was tense as the crew made their final approach toward the coordinates Jax had found. Clark sat at the front, eyes locked on the starfield outside the viewports. The Xalagor were a new threat, one humanity hadn't been prepared for. The Orcs, with their brutal strength and savagery, were bad enough. But the Tsalagor were different. They were cold, calculating, and ruthless. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to destroy, to wipe out entire civilizations without a second thought. Everyone knows their roles. Clark asked, his voice calm but commanding. Walker nodded, checking her weapons. I'm ready, but this feels different. The Tsalagor aren't like the Orcs. I've heard the rumors. Rumors don't matter. The facts do, Clark replied, his gaze hardening. They're just as deadly, but we're not going to let them take a step closer to Federation space. Dr. Pierce looked over at Clark, concern evident in her eyes. Clark, you're not thinking about going after the Tsalagor fleet, are you? That's suicide. We don't have the firepower for a full-scale battle. Clark turned to Pierce, his expression unshaken. We don't need to defeat their fleet. We just need to cripple their operations, take out their supply lines, disrupt their command chain, and force them to divert resources. If we can do that, we can buy the Federation enough time to counter their advance. Jax chimed in from his console. I've been tracking their ships. They're heading toward a system on the edge of Federation space. Epsilon 9. It's lightly defended, and it's where their supply lines meet. If we can take out their base there, we can disrupt their entire operation. They'll be forced to retreat or reorganize. Clark nodded, his mind working through the logistics. The plan was risky. No surprise there. But they had no other choice. If they let the Tsalagor gain a foothold in Federation space, it could be the end of everything humanity had fought for. Good, Clark said. We'll hit their base hard. No warning, no mercy. We go in fast, strike hard, and leave before they even know what hit them. We'll need to be fast, Riley added, his tone grim. The Tsalagor don't let their mistakes slide. If we don't cripple them in one shot, they'll come for us. Clark turned back to face the stars, the weight of their mission sinking in. If they come for us, they'll regret it. No one, not the Orcs, not the Tsalagor, understands what humanity is capable of when we're pushed to the edge. We fight back, and we don't stop until they know that they've lost. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere of Epsilon 9's moon, a barren rock with little to offer except the perfect location for an Orc and Tsalagor base. Clark's team suited up quickly, the weight of their armor giving them a sense of protection in the cold void of space. The plan was simple: land undetected, infiltrate the base, sabotage their infrastructure, and get out before the Tsalagor could launch a counterattack. As the shuttle descended into the moon's thin atmosphere, Clark could see the facility below. A sprawling complex of reinforced bunkers and communication towers, surrounded by trenches and automated turrets. There were signs of activity, but nothing that looked like an immediate threat. For now, they had the element of surprise. We drop in 5, Clark said, his voice cutting through the tension. Stay sharp. Understood, Walker responded, checking her rifle. Jax tapped a few commands into his console. I've disabled their external comms. They won't be able to call for backup until we're already out. Perfect, Clark said. Let's make it count. The shuttle touched down silently, and the team quickly disembarked. The ground was rocky and uneven, but their training kicked in. They moved quickly, blending into the shadows, ensuring no Orc or Tsalagor patrol spotted them. Stay low, Clark ordered. We need to hit them hard and fast. The team moved like ghosts, cutting through the perimeter defenses with deadly efficiency. They took down guards, set explosives on key infrastructure, and sabotaged anything that could help the enemy regroup. Clark kept his mind focused, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Their mission wasn't just about survival, it was about sending a message. By the time the sun began to rise over the barren horizon, the base was already in flames. Communications were severed, supply lines destroyed, and vital equipment reduced to rubble. Clark's team had left nothing standing. Extraction in 5, Jack said, his voice steady as ever. "We've done what we came here to do. Now we get out." "Not yet," Clark replied, glancing around the base. The destruction was complete, but the real challenge was still ahead. The Exalgor might be distracted, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. "We've got to make sure they don't follow us. One last job." Walker raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan?" Clark's lips curled into a grim smile. "We make sure this base is nothing but a memory." He activated the last set of explosives, an entire cache designed to level the complex, and set the countdown. As they made their way back to the shuttle, the explosion echoed behind them, a final, deafening statement to their enemies. The base was gone. The Orcs and Exalgor would know they had been hit hard, and they would know it wasn't a fluke. Humanity had struck back, and they wouldn't stop until their enemies had learned the true meaning of fear. As the shuttle lifted off, Clark took one last look at the burning wreckage below. The galaxy had just learned something vital. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. As the shuttle ascended from the smoldering ruins of Epsilon 9, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them. Clark stared out the viewport, the distant stars offering little solace. Their mission was a success, but he knew that what they had done was only a small piece of the puzzle. The Orcs and the Exalgor were far from defeated. They had made their mark, but the war was far from over. "Clark, you've got to see this," Jax called out from his console. Clark turned around, his curiosity piqued. He walked over to Jax, who was scanning through incoming transmissions. "What is it?" "Word's getting out," Jax said, tapping a few keys. "The Federation's picking up chatter from the Orc and Exalgor fleets. They're panicking." "Panicking?" Clark raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. They thought they had us cornered," Jax continued, a grin creeping onto his face. "They didn't think humans could hit so hard, not like this. They've been trying to piece together what happened, and they're not happy." Dr. Pierce walked over, her brow furrowed. "They're scared then. That's good. But fear only makes them more dangerous." Clark nodded. "True, but it also makes them vulnerable. Fear leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to victory." Jax's screen flickered as more data streamed in. "Here we go," he said, pointing to a series of intercepted communications. "The Exalgor fleet has pulled back. They've gone into a defensive posture, trying to regroup." "That's the break we needed," Clark said. "The Federation's got a window to prepare a counteroffensive. We've given them a fighting chance." Walker, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "But they're still out there. The Orcs won't stay quiet for long. They'll regroup. We've given them a good whack, but the fight isn't over." "I know," Clark said, his voice resolute. "But we've set the tone. We've shown them that we're not the weaklings they thought we were. We're not going to lie down and die. We'll keep hitting them. Every chance we get. We're going to break their morale." "And when we do?" Pierce asked, her tone cautious. "When we do," Clark said, his gaze hardening, we push until they break. Until the entire galaxy knows that if you come for humanity, you better be ready to pay the price." The shuttle hummed as it flew through the black void, the stars glittering like distant promises. For the first time in a long while, Clark felt the weight of their mission lift just a little. They had disrupted the Orc-Exalgor alliance and forced them into a retreat, buying humanity precious time. But there was still so much left to do. Clark turned back to his team, meeting each of their eyes. They had fought hard. They had risked everything. And now, they were stronger for it. "Prepare for a jump to the next objective," Clark ordered, voice unwavering. "We're not done yet. We've made our mark. But now it's time to finish what we started." The crew nodded in unison. The war had changed, but Clark could feel it deep in his bones. Humanity was no longer just a survivor in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would fight. They would fight until their enemies knew that to challenge humanity was to face an unrelenting storm, a force that could not and would not be stopped. The shuttle made the jump, leaving behind the ashes of the Orc and Salagor base, but Clark knew the fight was just beginning. There were more battles to fight, more enemies to face, and more victories to claim. Humanity was no longer a footnote in the galaxy's history. They were the storm on the horizon, and no one was safe.